Hey team, Richard Tubb here with another episode of Tubb Talk, the podcast for managed service providers. Now, social media is absolutely crucial for IT business marketing, and I would say that LinkedIn is the most important platform for managed service providers. So today we've got a returning guest who is, without a shadow of a doubt, the authority on LinkedIn. It was actually way back in Tubb Talk episode 53. John Espirian talked with us about leveraging LinkedIn for MSP growth, and that episode was one of our most popular ever. So we're excited to welcome back to the show the relentlessly helpful, the LinkedIn expert, John Espirian. John, welcome back to Tubb Talk. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Richard, for having me back. It's great to be here again.
Well, it's long overdue, my friend, because when I said we had brilliant feedback on that episode, I'm not joking. I remember we looked at the stats, the number of listeners, and there was a big spike around that episode. We had critical feedback from listeners as well, because the listeners to the show are not shy in letting us know what's working and what wasn't. So yeah, it's long overdue to get you back, but I guess we should start out with, for anyone who's not familiar with you or your work, I definitely recommend going back and listening to Tub Talk episode 53. But John, could you give us like a potted view, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I've got a bit of an IT background. I've got a maths
Yeah.
and computer science. I used to be a software and hardware tester, so I worked in the IT world for a long time, became a technical copywriter, and used LinkedIn to find leads for my copywriting business. And eventually, I was sharing so many tips on how LinkedIn works that people said, "Could you just show us how to do that bit as well, please?" So now I'm a LinkedIn guy. I run my own private community to help people get their businesses seen online. And I run a LinkedIn focused conference, which is Uplift Live as well. So, yeah, I've been doing LinkedIn consultancy pretty much exclusively for the last 4 or 5 years now.
And it's amazing to see your transformation. Obviously, you and I have known each other for a long time now. I think I knew you when you were first doing the technical copywriting and sort of not dipping a toe in because you've always been an expert in the LinkedIn side of things. But to see the transformation, that tagline, relentlessly helpful, you are my go-to guy for all things LinkedIn. And you just mentioned a couple of key assets that, in my LinkedIn journey as well. Your membership community, Espresso Plus. We've got to give a shout out to you and the members there because that is just one of the few communities or paid communities that I'm a part of. The reason I pay for that, and so many others do, is because you give such incredible value with what you do. So, first of all, tell us a bit about Espresso Plus, and then we'll talk about Uplift Live as well.
Yeah, sure. So Espresso Plus came about because I started a free mailing list where I was giving people what I call relentlessly helpful tips. And I thought it would be great to connect those people. And so I set up a discussion group. And that very quickly kind of took over my life because people were just talking all day, asking questions, connecting with each other. And I realized that I either had to shut that thing down and get on with my technical copywriting work, or I had to find a way of monetizing it. And so that's what I did. Espresso Plus has been running 3 years now. And we talk about all the topics that small business owners and solopreneurs and even bigger businesses have to contend with. How do you get seen in an ethical way? How do you create content that really lands with customers? How does LinkedIn work so that you can make that more effective? And having a small sort of private space to discuss that and share best practice tips has been really useful for lots of people over the last few years.
Yeah, and well, I wanted to give that plug for Espresso Plus right at the start here because it is phenomenal value. It's a no-brainer for me to be a member of it as well. I said you are my go-to person for LinkedIn, and so if you hadn't have started that community, I alone would have become such a pest to you asking questions that you would have had to start one anyway. But let's also give a shout out. So it was only a few weeks ago in my hometown of Birmingham that we had the second annual Uplift Live. So tell us a little bit about that event.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've been to loads of marketing events all
Yeah.
around the UK, and very often LinkedIn is a bit of an afterthought, or it doesn't get mentioned at all, or it gets mentioned in such a basic way that you don't really learn anything. And so I thought, let's put together an event that is focused on LinkedIn best practice, where we can delve beyond the surface into some of the more advanced strategies and the advanced tools that you can use to do with LinkedIn. And so that's what Uplift Live became. And we've done our second conference. We're heading into our third one next March, again in Birmingham. And we're getting some of the best speakers on the topics from around the world who specialize in LinkedIn. So it's not really a generalists conference, but If LinkedIn is something strategically valuable for you to build your business and have a presence beyond just your website or other social media, it's the place where you can really do a lot of focused learning and some practical takeaways. It's there's no fluff. We get into the weeds and talk about the details on how you can build a business online.
Yeah, and the reason I love it, been there 2 years in a row, and the reason we're such big supporters of the work that you're doing at Uplift Life. First of all, it's in Birmingham, so if you love a good curry, it is the place to be. So that's one of the nice side effects. But secondly, all joking aside, is the quality of speakers that you have, including yourself, who are there, are just absolutely top notch. And they're not just the UK's top speakers, are they? We've had people from all over the world coming to speak.
Yeah, we've had the UK's, we've had the world's number one actual company pages expert coming over from Australia, Michelle Raymond. We've had real experts coming over from the USA. So it's kind of no expenses spared. We want to get the best of the best there to speak on stage for that one day. And yeah, it's gone really, really well so far.
Yeah, and on the subject of LinkedIn, obviously we're going to talk a lot about LinkedIn during
Mm,
our conversation today. But a lot has changed for LinkedIn since we last spoke, all the way back in episode
mm,
53 of Tub Talk. How has your own approach to LinkedIn evolved since then, John? Because the platform evolves on an almost daily basis, and which
yeah.
I go to you for, all the tips and the advice on that. But how has
Yeah.
your approach evolved?
Well, I think LinkedIn at the moment seems to be absolutely obsessed with putting AI into every nook and cranny of the platform. And
Not
therefore,
surprisingly, given Microsoft's backing there, I should say.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. You know, they're kind of massive investors in OpenAI. So there's obviously a connection there with LinkedIn as well. But I think what I'm seeing, and in fact, LinkedIn's own CEO said just a few days ago that they were disappointed at people's responses to LinkedIn supporting AI for post content generation
Yeah.
and comment generation and so forth. It's not a surprise to me at all. And I think my own approach has been to double down on the things that demonstrate that you are not AI. And that's the real secret to being remembered. And this is what it's all about. If you want your business to be seen, especially in a market where you're providing a service that might be very similar to lots of other people, and I'm sure that's going to be true for many MSPs out there, the differentiator is what is the person or the people behind the business, what are their human traits, how can you relate to people, how is it relatable and memorable, and AI is not really going to break through those barriers at the moment. So
Yeah.
I've been doubling down on those things, and therefore that gives rise to things like creating more video, sending more DMs, attending in-person events so that people can see you're a real person. Stuff like that is the thing that sets you apart from AI. So that's probably the big change. And before AI really got off the ground on LinkedIn, the other thing they decided was a focus was video as well. So
Mm.
they're really pushing that, especially on the mobile app. And the mobile app now accounts for somewhere between 70 and 80% of all LinkedIn use, which to me
Wow.
is incredible because I'm a desktop guy.
Yeah, same here.
Um, and yet, video is very, very visible on LinkedIn Mobile. So that's something I'm going to probably have to lean more into. And we're not quite at the point where you can't tell whether a video is real or generated. Who knows where we might be in a couple of years' time? But right now, there's a chance to put your kind of behind the scenes or educational content into video form and stand out through that route as well.
I'm so glad that you brought up both of those subjects. Video, something obviously very dear to my heart, and we'll talk about that. But the AI side of things,
Mm,
this is going to sound not controversial, but I'm going to put it out there. I have been turned off on LinkedIn for the past few
mm,
months because some of the posts that I'm seeing from individuals who are good human beings that I know them, but they're not writers, and I'm seeing works of like Shakespeare come out from them in written text posts, and it turns me off because I think I'm pretty sure you didn't write that.
Mm.
Am I being sensitive there, John? Or because it seems the vast majority of people couldn't care less whether it's AI generated or actually the real human sentiment. So am I being overly sensitive there? Or what are you seeing from Espresso Plus members and the wider populace and your own views on these really well crafted text posts from people? But when you know the individual, you're like, you're not that good a
Yeah.
writer. So what's going
Yeah.
on there?
Whenever I speak to people in person at offline events, a lot of people roll their eyes at what LinkedIn is becoming because they're
Yeah.
put off by those AI generated posts and comments. So, and that's reflected in LinkedIn's own CEO admitting that they're disappointed with the uptake of those features. It doesn't surprise me at all. It's very easy to spot something that is AI generated. And it looks like you've just pressed the easy button. You haven't
Yeah.
put any real thought into your thing. What you should do is use AI as a companion if you're going to use it at all. So maybe you could test some. You could tell it to generate a load of post ideas, and you could pick the ones that you find interesting, and then put your own spin on those things. That's fine. You're workshopping ideas, but not just outsource the whole thing to the bot, because people can still detect that, and it really does break the trust, which is fragile. It breaks the trust. If I started doing that, I don't think anyone really would want to listen to me for LinkedIn insights.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And obviously, the reason I'm so cautious about sharing that opinion publicly, as we've just done there, but you're a writer, your background, I wouldn't ever consider myself to be, a professional writer, but I have written for 20 odd years. So I've got quite good, you and I have got quite good with what we do. It's our sort of bread and butter. And so I err on the side of caution because there's lots of people who, writing is a barrier to them putting out something. So AI enables them to do that. But actually, I feel as though it's gone too far. And knowing the human beings behind some of these posts, I'm like, wow, that is an incredible post, but I don't think you sat there and crafted it. So again, what would you say to people who, when they see writing almost as a barrier to getting out there and doing these really good LinkedIn posts, which we all encourage, but it stands out a mile when it's all AI generated. Where's the happy medium?
I think, well, let me just say that often the posts that perform best for me are the ones that I haven't done a lot of thinking about, because they
Right.
often express in the first two or three lines where you've got your preview space of text some kind of high touch emotion, something that you're irritated about, or something you've just seen. It's kind of breaking news, or it's something that is on your mind and has been irritating you. And you dash something off, and that kind of thing can resonate with people. It hasn't been AI checked at all. It might not even have been spell checked. You just put it out into the world. And that kind of thing can really land well with people. It's the most unexpected things sometimes that do well. Whereas I might take 2 hours to make a 10-minute video of something like a detailed process that I'm
Yeah.
explaining, and it goes nowhere because it doesn't really stir the emotion in the reader. And that's something that AI is bad at, is eliciting emotion from the reader. So whereas
Yeah.
you, the real human being, can do that a lot better. So I wouldn't let that hold you back. I don't think people are going to judge you negatively if, for example, you do, make grammatical or spelling mistakes. It doesn't really matter in terms of the humanity that you're bringing across in your post. So don't let that stop you. And remember that even now, it's probably only about 5% of the LinkedIn user base that is posting on a frequent basis.
Mm,
And that means that there's a massive untapped potential. LinkedIn is not the saturated place that you might think it was, certainly nothing compared with Facebook. And just on that point as well, LinkedIn often say how many users they've got. We're in the kind of 1.2 to 1.1 to 1.2 billion user accounts. But actually, because of disclosures that have to be made in the EU, we know from extrapolation that the actual number of active users on LinkedIn across the world is in the order of 350 million people. And we're
interesting.
saying that maybe 5% of those people are actively posting on a regular basis. So actually, there's not that many people that you need to compete against. So if you start showing up when you weren't before, you've got a chance to generate new business. So don't be afraid, and just start posting stuff and start commenting on content to get yourself more visible.
Yeah. So we've mentioned AI video. I'm sure we'll revisit those, but let's go
Mhm.
back to Uplift Live, which took place in March of this year. Brilliant event.
Mhm.
You've got experts from all across the world, including yourself,
Yep.
and everybody there. What were some of the other themes that you would say came out of Uplift Live? Was there anything with your finger on the pulse that sort of surprised you that came out of Uplift Live?
Well, our session on content creation and video content creation with Juma Bannister, who came over from Trinidad and
Yeah,
Tobago,
he was
I
awesome,
think
by
that
the way.
that
Yeah.
that really went down very, very well. People loved the session that Michelle delivered on company pages, which for me, company pages have actually turned me off for quite a while,
Mm,
but mostly because I'm kind of a bit greedy for engagement and they tend not to get as good engagement as
yeah.
personal posts. But I think her session showed that they can be useful and they are strategically valuable for every type of business, whether you work on your own or whether you work for a small, medium, or large enterprise. It's a good idea to create a company page, and it was a good reminder of some of the reasons why. So, for anyone out there who doesn't already have a company page, you're focusing everything on personal, please do go and create one. You could set one up. You could set up a working skeleton of a company page in 5 minutes. I've done it just to test. So it's not difficult to set up, doesn't require that much maintenance, but it does give you a free spot in the Google rankings and opens the doors to some other things as well.
That really took me by surprise, really caught my attention. I believe it was Louise Brogan, was it a year ago at Uplift Live 2024? Forgive me if that was not the
Yeah,
case, but she talked about company pages. Took me totally by surprise, and I'm like, oh, yeah, because
yeah.
like you and like so many of our listeners, I'd sort of dismissed that. I was like, oh, there's nothing in it.
Mm,
But actually, big thanks there because we developed our company page and fast forward to Uplift Live this year. And we've tweaked it even further thanks to the advice that we got from the event. But yeah, it is performing for us, and we're seeing a great deal of
yeah.
engagement come through that as well. So, do you think anything's changed behind the scenes at LinkedIn as well in terms of the company pages? They're putting a little bit of a focus on it, or
Yeah, I mean, they want you to invest in the premium company page option, which I don't recommend based on
yeah,
the people I've talked to within Espresso Plus who've tried it out, and it's about £99 a month.
oh
They're not
wow,
getting a lot of value for that, but I do think that it's a chance to get you some more visibility by um, doing company page comments on other people's posts, which isn't something that I massively recommended before. But having seen Michelle's talk this year on company pages, I'm now kind of recommending that to my clients again. So if you haven't seen this before, whenever you look at a post, you've got the like button and the comment button, and to the left of the like button, you will see your own face.
hmm,
If you click on that, you have a chance to comment as your company instead of you as the person. So
interesting.
long as you're an admin of the company, and what that means for businesses is that rather than maybe, seeing things as a personal opinion, you could go and find content that is relevant to your industry. So let's say, for example, some new report has come out about some legislation or some change to the way the IT infrastructure works in the UK, something like that. You could go and find content like that, and you could switch into company mode and leave a comment saying, well, this is our take on this, and here's our
Yeah,
evidence, and that gets your company visibility, and all clicks from that comment lead back to your company page, and it's a chance of growing your brand. And although personal profile content does, it is true that it gets more visibility in the feed. In terms of building your company brand, it's a good idea to do things through your company page wherever you can, because in the event that someone leaves the business, the company is protected because the company has been building up. So, for
hmm,
example, a classic risk issue here is that someone starts building their personal brand, and they start a newsletter, and then they start posting about the company through the newsletter, and then they get a better offer and they go and move to London, double the pay and all that. How do you transfer all the newsletter content? You don't.
yeah.
Right. So newsletters through your company page, which wasn't really possible until relatively recently, that's the kind of avenue that you want to explore. Comments to the company page to try and build up that brand identity there as well.
That right there is absolute gold for our listeners, because there's lots of owners of MSP businesses listening to this. And of course, I banged on personally for years, as I know you have as well, about personal branding, the value of it. You and
Mm,
I are living proof. We started off as one thing.
yeah,
You were technical copywriter, and me as an MSP, and we've gone off into, doing what we love, talking about our respective businesses, personal brand. But there is a big risk, isn't there, for MSP owners listening, where you've got the rock star engineer or the rock star salesperson working for your business. They build that personal brand. They own the relationships there. And then
yeah,
when they move on to pastures new, it all sort of goes with them. So that's probably another great
yeah,
reason, isn't it, for the
yeah.
for developing the company pages.
Yeah, I would say get the best of both worlds. By all means, build the personal brands of the people within the business, because that will attract new talent. It will make you look kind of bigger than you might actually be. You know, if you've got three people who are really out there smashing it, people might think, oh, this is a massive business who've got all these superstars. It might
Yeah.
just be those three marketing guys who've got a little talent for LinkedIn. So get them by all means to create the content, but also I would say have a shadow version of that going
Mm.
out through your company channel, so that in the event that those people do move on, you've still got something of a base to build on, rather than being left in the lurch with content you can't transfer that effectively becomes orphaned and forgotten about, and potentially even deleted, that you have no control over.
Yeah. Now we've gone deep really quickly here, and I make no apologies for that, because John, you are absolutely awesome at this stuff. And people who listen to our first podcast interview or know your work online know you do the work. You make sure you manage by metrics. You see what works.
Mm.
You nurture that, and you deliver it to us. So thank you for that. However, there's going to be some people listening to this. LinkedIn, they're not involved in. They're like, okay, what's all the big fuss? In fact, if this feels incredible to me, John, but there are still IT business owners out there who feel like LinkedIn is just for job seekers. So, how do you reframe it as a genuine business growth platform for people who are perhaps not deep into the LinkedIn infrastructure like you and I are?
Yeah, well, the compelling case for me when I was still a technical copywriter to really invest more time in LinkedIn is I started noticing that the people who were approaching me for work via LinkedIn, because of this nascent personal brand that I was building, were paying me 30% more than the people who were finding me through Google.
Mm,
So on Google, the mindset was different. People were searching to solve a problem, and they're more price sensitive, and there's no investment in the person. It's just we've got a problem, we need it fixed. Whereas by creating a kind of environment of content, a footprint on LinkedIn, people were seeing my content and they were saying, I specifically want him. And those people were therefore willing to pay the premium to get my time. Now, if you're an MSP or any IT business and you don't have a presence on LinkedIn, you are at risk of being part of the race to the bottom on price for
yeah.
someone who does a Google search and is looking for a provider. Whereas if you build a brand on LinkedIn, the people who find you there, um, over time, if you've built up enough helpful content, they're more likely to go, we want to work with that specific company, and they will pay the premium to do that. So that's the difference. The only thing is, it's not going to happen overnight. If you think you're going to just publish, a few blog posts and all of a sudden you're going to be the go-to destination for MSPs, that ain't going to happen. It's a long-term, thing to do. But remember that publishing content on LinkedIn is free. So whether it's a short form post, a long form article, a newsletter that people subscribe to, all of that as a media channel is free for you to access. You don't need to pay LinkedIn anything to publish on its platform. So if you're already got any kind of content that's going out in the world through your website, through email, through any other channels, please make sure that that content is also represented on LinkedIn, because yes, there's a lot of misconceptions that LinkedIn is only for job seekers, but a lot of people are turning around to the fact that this is a place to network, connect with peers, connect with potential customers, and actually do deals. And those deals tend to be of a higher value than they are on other social networks.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that word media in there because at the moment, I'm on a bit of a soapbox topic in the IT industry, saying actually, I think well, what I'm observing is the most progressive IT companies, the ones who are pulling away from the pack, have almost turned themselves into media companies that
Yeah,
also do IT rather than IT companies that
yeah,
do a little bit of media. And I obviously I'm my background as a former managed service provider owner, had the blog, Tublog, and all the rest of it. We are essentially, even though we're not an MSP now, a media company.
yeah,
So it's taken me a long time to stand on the soapbox and say, actually, I think IT companies also need to be media companies at the moment. But that can be quite scary, can't it, for some people who are not doing it at all? So what would you say to anybody who's listening to this? An expert like yourself talking about where you can go with LinkedIn and the heady heights you can reach with it, but are feeling left behind and like, wow, we haven't done any of that, let alone becoming a media company, Richard and John. So, what would you say to those
yeah.
people who are feeling really left behind?
I would say spend a little bit of time just mapping out all of the questions that you get asked on a daily basis,
Yeah,
because that will it'll to you it'll look so basic that you'll think, why do I even bother? But honestly, from the other side of the telescope, if you like, the other side of the fence, um, someone who's answered all of the questions will just seem inherently much more trustworthy than someone who hasn't said anything at all. So if I know how to set up the most basic IT thing in the world, right, and I can explain that to my customer, and that customer doesn't have to feel stupid because they don't actually want to pick up the phone and ask, how do I turn so and so on, right? But you've explained that. That gives them comfort that you probably know what you're talking about. You've probably done it a million times before, and you can probably just sort out everything else as well. So if you
yeah,
spend a bit of time mapping out those questions, you'd be amazed at how many questions you do have to answer. And it's such a time waster. If you're answering the same questions over and over again, your support staff are answering the same things over and over again, rather than bashing out form emails or saying the same thing over the phone, put that into a content estate that you start publishing. That'll keep you busy for ages if you haven't started doing it already. Yeah.
yeah,
So start there. It'll feel very basic, but you'll be surprised at how little non-experts know about these things. You're an expert because you do it every day, but your customers are not experts. That's why they're hiring you. They don't have the time, right?
yeah.
So start by answering those things, and when you're a few months into doing that, you'll start seeing people, approaching you when you'd never heard of them, but they've heard of you because they're starting to see your content, and that's a wonderful feeling when that happens.
Love that approach, John. Again, absolute gold advice. I would also say, thinking as a former MSP myself and knowing the mind of IT business owners as I do, that some people listening to this are going to be like, "Whoa, what sort of questions I get asked?" Guys, girls, go and have a look at your PSA, your professional services automation or your help desk tool. It has got every question that you've ever been asked in there pretty much. So, there's something in there you can just go through and there's going to be 10, 25, 100 questions
Yeah,
immediately that you can produce
yeah.
content around, isn't there?
Also, just think about the kind of universe that your clients occupy, so that you can maybe go beyond the bounds of the direct service you supply into something that is related and still helpful, right? So if it's something
Yeah.
that's going to be relevant to your audience. So for example, what makes a strong password? How do you go about choosing a password? Where would you store a password? You're trying to buy some new laptops. What kind of things should you think about when you're doing that? What kind of computers work well on standing desks? It's like all of the kind of extra stuff that you're not necessarily being paid for by your clients to answer, but just shows that you understand the predicaments that they have to deal with day to day. Um, what happens to a device when an employee leaves the business? Like what kind of things do you have to think about? If you can answer stuff like that, again, it shows that you've really thought about the other person. You're producing helpful content, and that educational piece at the moment is working well on LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn have
Yeah.
said themselves that they want to see a little bit less of the kind of personal storytelling stuff and a bit more emphasis on concrete educational content, with a view to try and promote that in the feed a bit. So now is as good a time as any to try and show that you can deliver that educational content.
That's fascinating to me what you just shared about LinkedIn's focus on this, because something
Mm.
else, and again, I'm going to sound like a grumpy old man shouting at clouds here, John. There's the risk of that. But what I've observed on LinkedIn over the past couple of years and that, obviously there's the old adage, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So I've always been a huge fan of being authentic, putting yourself out there and sharing, pulling back the curtains and showing people who you are and what you do behind the scenes and stuff. However, it does feel as though it's tipped over too far. And I go on LinkedIn, there's very little to do with business in some of the profiles that I see, or a lot of the profiles I see. And it's very much all people just talking, almost Facebook like, talking about what they've got up to day. Now, of course, there's a place for that. However, it's interesting to me that you said about LinkedIn are saying, okay, guys, let's focus a little bit more on the business side. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on what you've learned about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just them trying to set themselves in the marketplace
Yeah,
as not trying to be another Facebook or a TikTok. It's somewhere. This is a place of business. LinkedIn's stated aim is to enhance the economic opportunity for the world's workforce, right? So therefore, it has to be business focused in the main. It's fine to put some personality in there, it's fine to put some personal stories, but you don't want it to go all the way in the wrong direction so that people don't even know what your business is, because all you're doing is talking
yeah,
about personal
yeah,
stuff all the time. I think of it as a bit of a thermostat, the difference between personal and professional. Some people like it cold and some people like it hot, and where you set the dial is kind of your own preference. It's got to be where you feel comfortable, but also where your customers will align with. If you're dealing with a really, really serious audience, as often IT professionals are, if you're just talking about personal stuff all the time, they might just feel that that's lacking professionalism. And it
yeah.
might not be, but optics matter. Like if it looks like you're just having a laugh all the time, or you're not very serious, then that's probably not great for business. And you can go too far in the other direction, in which case you just look like a robot who's got no humanity at all, right? So what I do is, because I feel more comfortable with focusing on the relentlessly helpful content, I tend to keep my posts quite factual. I try not to put any fluff in them, and I can see that hopefully would resonate with people in the IT world. And so what I do is I let the personality side of things tend to come out in my comments, which are not quite so visible. The
Yeah.
post is kind of taking up the billboard, if you like, but the comments is where you can say some more interesting kind of personality led things, and also doing that in the DMs. So that's where people get to know me a lot better, is kind of away from the highways uh, of LinkedIn, and behind the scenes, and that's where you form those relationships and become memorable. I might talk to someone about football and they remember me because of football. That's great. I love that. But my posts, which is like, that's the record of my academic work, if you like, on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. That is like, here's a topic I'm going to talk about. I'm going to deliver you the facts. I'm going to do it in bullet point format. There's not going to be long waffling paragraphs. I'm just going to be very, very focused, so that if I ever look back on that footprint, you can demonstrate a track record of, this guy knows what he's on about, and bang, 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 here's all the useful information that we can put into practice. But if we really want to do our due diligence and know more about him, we'll read the about statement in his profile where he goes into more detail. We'll read the comments. We'll take attention to the DMs that he's sending us, and the voice notes and the videos and whatever else. And that's where you get a more rounded view of the person. But I would say try and keep the posts themselves quite focused on business and the questions that you're answering for customers.
Amazing, incredible advice. And just as a side note, John, this is my job. I do these podcasts and that. And again, for the benefit of listeners, it's such a joy to speak to somebody like yourself who puts in the work, who gives such amazing answers to these questions and that. It's an absolute, a real joy to speak to you about these things, and it shines across. So I hope I'm not making you blush as a friend too much, but you are delivering incredible advice to
Cheers.
our audience and everybody. So thank you. On that subject, you talk a lot about being relentlessly helpful. It's become,
Yeah.
what you've been known for. I'm a member of your Espresso Plus community. I can absolutely attest to that. But if an MSP listening wanted to emulate that approach, what does being relentlessly helpful actually look like day to day for an MSP on LinkedIn, for instance?
Well, I think and I say this in my book, Content DNA, as well, which is that you just got to try and get to the point and think of what is the most helpful thing for this person in this situation. So that comes back to understanding what their needs are, and trying to explain things as thoroughly and clearly and concisely as you can.
Mm.
Right. So think about what their problems are and what the direct solutions are that you can just get to the point. Okay. We don't want 3 paragraphs before we get to the recipe. We want the recipe. So give people as much help as you can there, and make it relatable as much as possible and relevant. Those are the things to aim for. Um, a lot of people will try and push back on that and
Mm.
say, well, hang on, well, we know how to do this. I don't know, this certain custom installation procedure or whatever, and no one else does it like us, and we don't want to give away our secrets. And fine, if you want to take that approach, don't post about how all that demonstrates all this great stuff. Just keep it a secret and hope that people will pick you rather than the next guy who's 50% cheaper, who doesn't know half of what you know, but he's on social media talking about the stuff that they
Yeah.
do, right? That's not the way it works anymore. You've got to showcase your knowledge, and don't be fearful of the people who might try and steal ideas or anything like that, because realistically, people are probably going to steal ideas. There's an argument for saying that all ideas are stolen in one way or another because everything builds on everything else. So
Absolutely.
the more you put out there, the more likely you are to build that footprint and be seen. So just focus on whatever's going to be the most helpful for your audience. Here's a case in point. I hate it when businesses don't share their pricing or their pricing strategy, right? So even if they don't put an actual pound figure on things, they could at least talk about the things that influence price.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you've got a really complex cybersecurity requirement, and by the way, you deal with some government contracts, that's probably going to be a much more expensive engagement than someone who's just running a paper mill and needs an IT system put in, right? So talk about those factors, and give people some idea of, like, how much is it going to cost? How much are these things going to? How long are these things going to take? What are the ongoing maintenance things to consider, and what other things haven't we thought about that you, from your 20 odd years of experience, know what it means to run an MSP service for someone. Showcase that knowledge. That's being relentlessly helpful, and also things like when you make connections with people. I often find that being the node of a really powerful node of your network means that you look for good people in your community or your network to introduce to others, right? You could just sit there and go, well, that person can just build their own network. None of my business, right? I'm building my own thing here. But if you can go, Rick and someone else would be great connections with each other. And actually, I can see they're only 20 miles away, and they'd be brilliant to set up a meeting between them. That kind of thing. Again, you're adding value to your network. That's a fantastic thing to do. Or if you see, like, some industry reports come out and you've got, I don't know, 20 of your best customers, sending them individual emails to say, look, just seen this and I thought of you, and you'd find this particular bit interesting. And remember that project we worked on? This could be relevant to that. That kind of thing is kind of going above and beyond. You're being their eyes, and then they haven't paid for that, but you're
Yeah.
showing that you are being a professional friend to them by being on the lookout. You've got their back. Those people are much more likely to refer you, recommend you, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and again, I'm so glad you said that. So, in my opinion, there is so much to being an MSP, a good MSP, or an IT company that's nothing at all to do with IT. And you've just
Mm.
mentioned one of them, and I speak from experience here. I live the Go Giver philosophy by the great book by Bob Berg and John David Mann. Absolutely love it. And they talk about being a connector. And when I was an MSP, I would say that a lot of the value that we brought to clients, of course, you fixing their IT problems and that, but it would be they would pick up the phone and say, "Hey, we've got an issue with this, that, or the other. Do you know anybody who can help out with it?" Yes, yes, we'll connect you. And then being, proactively connecting them with people all the time. And it's just something you do naturally, John. I've seen you do
Mm.
it. Espresso Plus is, testament to that. But IT businesses, they can give so much value to clients by being the center of that wheel, that hub of connections there, and being a connector and going out there and looking for those connections, because your clients will end up doing business with one another just because of
Mm.
an introduction you've made.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? And
Yeah.
those people are just much less likely to leave you because like retention is a big thing as well. If you're going
Yeah.
above and beyond and you're doing things that are beyond just the sticker price you're charging for each month, those people aren't going to want to leave you. They'll stick around, and there's massive value in that.
Yeah. There's a question that's on the front of mind for me at the moment. So you talked about the number of LinkedIn users in the EU globally, things like that.
Yeah,
LinkedIn, of course, is a very global platform. We've got a global audience for this podcast. We've got MSP South Africa, United States, everywhere, North America, Europe, all over the world. However, the majority of MSPs, the vast majority of MSPs who listen to this show, when they're using LinkedIn, they want to reach people within their local geography, not globally. Can you give any suggestions? Is there a content strategy you recommend specifically for MSPs who serve local or even vertical markets? So we've got, specialize in service companies or estate agents, realtors, but the majority of MSPs work with small businesses local to them. Any
yeah.
suggestions on how they can tweak LinkedIn for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a there's a use case here for LinkedIn ads. I don't use them myself, but because LinkedIn ads allow you to target, specialized groups, and you can target by geography as well. There's a use case for that. They do work out more expensive than ads on other social media platforms, though. I mean, I would probably re-emphasize in your posts and in your profile which geographies you serve.
Yeah.
Feel free to kind of reinforce that. You could even make hashtags about it as well. Hashtags aren't great for findability, but just to re-emphasize what you care about, they're good to mention. And then showcasing again, thinking about the bigger world of your ideal customer. So let's say you did work in Birmingham. If you were talking about being of the city, not just in the city. This is a Mark Schaefer kind of thing. Is like show that you are from there, that you know the local geography, that you're supporting a local charity, or something specific about the way the business works in that area, just to show that you're not this isn't just some franchise that actually works all over everywhere, but you've got some special knowledge about the city. That again is more likely to get you more visibility. And to be mindful when you're making connections, just try and make more connections with the people who are in that area.
Yeah.
Try and look for groups that are relevant to that area. So for example, you might look up Chamber of Commerce in Birmingham, or other groups related to Birmingham, because you might find then the potential clients in that area. So just take that approach, I would say. There's no other magic bullet for doing this, but showing that you're of the city is powerful.
Something that occurred to me, and I've been meaning to ask you about this. Is there any value in culling LinkedIn connections who perhaps don't serve much of a purpose to amplify the local
Mm.
reach a little bit more or not?
Well, I'd like to say there is. In my experience, there isn't.
Hmm.
I did an experiment last year where I removed around 2,000 connections because I heard from a couple of other people that it can make a difference in terms of the visibility to those who are left.
Yeah.
Actually, my visibility hasn't improved since making that change, and it does take a while to do because there's no batch disconnect option on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, so you've got to do it manually. So for me, I don't think so. What one thing you could do to just improve the quality of what's in your LinkedIn feed, if you have been one of those people who's connected with a lot of people in the past, is that when you see a post from someone and that post isn't adding any value to you, and you're thinking, well, I'm not getting a lot from this, but you don't want to go as far as disconnecting with the person,
Yeah.
you could just unfollow that person. So that means that you still have the first level network connection, so you could still direct message each other, for example, and they will still see your content. It's just that you won't see their content in your feed, and that is a way of improving your LinkedIn experience, which is worthwhile, because otherwise, if you've got a rubbish LinkedIn experience, you're probably not going to spend very much time on the platform, and that will have other downstream negative effects on how much value you get from the platform. So
Yeah. Yeah.
unfollowing is probably an easier option than disconnecting, and in my experience, disconnecting hasn't really done a lot for me, and it took me quite a while to do all of that. So I can't actually honestly recommend that you do that.
Interesting. I knew you would have done the work on that already, John. This is another the other reason you're my go-to guy for these things. You do the work that takes the time and then share the results with us. So thank you for that. Um, what's working? Let's get into the weeds now a little bit because I know our listeners, a lot of them are very much into LinkedIn and love that. What's
Mm.
working right now in LinkedIn in terms of like post format, frequency, engagement, that type of thing? Is there any, hacks that you can give us there, or what's actually working, what isn't?
Yeah, at the moment, LinkedIn is pushing short form video.
Hmm.
So especially on the mobile platform. So if you create what you might look at as video shorts on YouTube or short videos on TikTok, if you create that kind of content and put it on LinkedIn, that kind of content has a good chance of being seen. So what we're talking about is portrait mode, so vertical camera, um, under a minute long, and burn your captions into the video, which is not normally the advice I would give. I prefer
Yeah.
separating video and captions because I think it's more accessible that way. But posts with video posts with the captions actually inside the video seem to perform a little bit better. And LinkedIn is now rolling out, I don't have this yet, but it started rolling out in the US already, a grid style video appearance
Okay.
in the mobile app. So you'll have a video button in the bottom left corner. When you tap that, instead of just seeing a video and then you just doom scroll for the rest of your life, what you'll see is a grid with topics, and you'll be able to kind of start your journey wherever you want.
Okay.
And that what that means is that if you create video content, you need to focus on what's in your thumbnail because that's going to be quite eye catching in that grid, and keep it under a minute, and that kind of stuff performs quite well. So that's one format. LinkedIn has recently increased the number of options you can get on a poll from 4 to 5 options. So polls are not dead and they do still get good engagement. I think people are not posting quite as many vacuous polls as they used to. So there's no
Yeah.
kind of, which do you prefer, tea or coffee? No, no, we've moved beyond that now. So if you're if you've got a marketing research type question to ask your audience, so for example, would you prioritize paying for support for people working from home on mobile devices versus people working in office on desktop? It's a random question. That kind of thing can give you real insight because you can see how people vote. You can see the specific people who have voted as well. So that gives you a follow up opportunity of contacting those people because you can go, well, guess what? We're moving into that next month. Do you want preferential pricing? And also, you can create content that talks about the results of your poll. So people love new research, right? It's one of my most popular topics on LinkedIn is when I've done some digging, which takes some
Yeah.
time. If I can say, well, look, if I put a link in a post, it gets me 23% less visibility, which, it's a recent finding of mine. Um, Sharing stats like that through research are really, really popular with the audience. And if you do a poll and you get enough people voting, you can turn that into, we've done some research and this is how the audience voted, and here's the insight you can get from that. So that's a kind of content that can fly pretty well. And the other
Okay.
type that is still working well for me, although I don't do it that often anymore, because it takes a bit longer to create this kind of content, is PDF based content. So document posts, they tend to perform better than any other post type for me. But I would caveat that by saying you've got to experiment with you. Last time we spoke, Richard, I think at the time Saturdays and Sundays were my best posts,
Yeah.
best times for posting. It's now Wednesday followed by Sunday, so that's changed.
Yeah.
I've been tracking this for 8 years now, right? So every post I do goes into my special spreadsheet, and I know right what is the most popular. So I can't really explain why that change has happened, but it
Hmm.
has happened. And now that I know that it's happened, if I've got something strategically important, like for example, I'm talking about, the next Uplift Live speaker's been announced and come to our conference, probably going to post it on a Wednesday because for me, that works. I don't know what's going to work for your audience. They
Yeah.
need to kind of track their own stats, and you can just do that in Excel or Google Sheets. You don't need to pay for any third party tool. You can just, if you're systematic about saying, I posted this on this date, this is how many views it got, this is how many comments it got, you can build a picture relatively quickly of what works for you and just do more of that.
Love it, yeah. And I would expect nothing less of you than to have that awesome spreadsheet, by the way, tracking those things. So very cool. You mentioned third-party tools there. I'm
Yeah.
intrigued. Are there any third-party tools that you recommend at the moment? I'm seeing a lot of tools with automation and that, and I think they're they're a risky proposition because I've seen people using them, and I think if LinkedIn catch you using them, they're going to suspend
Yeah.
your account or at least put you in the sin bin for a while. What are your thoughts on
Yes.
third-party tools?
Yeah, they're major risk. I don't use any of them anymore.
Really?
So I use Excel to log my own stats manually, which sounds like a real pain, but actually once you get into the habit of it, it
Yeah.
becomes a no-brainer. Um, any tool, especially one that requires access to your LinkedIn cookie, is a major security risk because, as you know, your audience will know this. If someone has a cookie for a website, they can effectively act as you. They can
Mm,
bypass, two-factor authentication. They can just get straight in, uh, and that's a major security risk. And you're at their mercy then. If they don't have ethical processes for safeguarding your data, you're in real trouble. And for that reason, I don't recommend the use of any third-party tool. In practice, I know that lots of people use them and they'll use them without any kind of detection and they'll get away with it and everything will
yeah.
be hunky-dory. But if LinkedIn is strategically valuable to you, I would not risk it. And I've seen too many cases of people getting banned for doing stuff like that to ever recommend it to anyone. So I'd strongly recommend that you don't do anything like that. And it's a good idea just to be sure because there have been some false positives on LinkedIn of people getting banned, who were genuinely completely innocent and something has gone wrong. So
Mm,
please make sure that you go and do your data archive download every 6 months or so. So in your settings and privacy, there's a data privacy section. You can request your complete archive of everything. And and while we're at that, what I could say is that, for example, if you were to get your complete data archive, it takes about 48 hours to generate. That's gonna show you all of the posts you've ever made, but also all of the direct messages you've ever sent. Now,
mm,
if you wanted to, you could push that content into some AI tool that you trust and say, just analyze my content and tell me what kind of themes I talk about, or look at these DMs and say, tell me who my top 10 most valuable customers are likely to be based on the way that we talk to each other. Because so that kind of insight could be useful, and it would take a long time to do that manually. So those
yeah.
are the cases where AI can do some analysis for you and give you some insight without being your kind of front of house representative that goes out in the world and looks obviously automated. Those are the things that I don't like. So yeah, third party tools I would stay away from.
Makes a lot of sense. So we talked about third-party tools, perhaps staying away from them now. Let's talk about LinkedIn, some of the paid options that you've got on there. So you've
Yeah.
already mentioned one a little bit earlier that perhaps wasn't so good value or you don't recommend.
Mm,
LinkedIn have got various other options now, Sales
yeah.
Navigator and things like that. Talk us through
Yeah.
that. What in your opinion, in 2025 is good value and what is like meh?
Yeah, I think if you're a power user, if you've already exhausted all of the free version of LinkedIn, right, then upgrading to Premium Business or Sales Navigator will probably make sense. But most people are not in that boat.
Yeah.
Most people who do upgrade think that, they've got a gold badge now, their content's going to be more visible, and all of a sudden the customers are going to come flying through the door. It doesn't work like that at all. It will give you some extra search capability. It'll give you some ability to connect with people more easily, and give you access to things like LinkedIn Learning, where you can upskill your team, perhaps. So those are good things, but you really need to make value out of the free version of LinkedIn. So keep in mind, you can set your profile image, your background banner image, you can write a headline, you can write an about statement, you can write posts, you can leave comments, you can send direct messages. You can do all of that for free, and you're probably not doing it brilliantly right now. So focus on doing those basics brilliantly. When you're at the limit, that's when it's worth probably taking a trial of premium just to be certain that it's going to work for you, and then to do the upgrade. But for the majority of people, probably for 90% of the clients I talk to, I don't recommend that they upgrade to premium because they're not quite ready for it. They're not doing all of the other basics well first.
Yeah.
You can go to levels above that. LinkedIn Recruiter is a thing. Ads are there. We've already mentioned those, but these things tend to work out quite expensive. So, for example, if you were to place LinkedIn ads, you probably need a LinkedIn ad specialist to guide you on maximizing the use of your budget. Because I know, again, this was mentioned at the conference by AJ Wilcox, the world's #1 ads expert on LinkedIn. He came and said LinkedIn's default settings for adverts will mean that you're spending money through the nose that you don't need to spend. But unless you know which options to turn off, you're flying a bit blind and you're probably not going to get the results you were looking for.
Yeah, and John's not paid me to say this whatsoever, I should say up front, but that money you were going to perhaps spend on some of those LinkedIn premium features, which are not going to add great value, go and sign up for an Espresso Plus membership community membership there because really, really good value. But yeah, here's a question, John. I was with an MSP just last week at an event, in fact, and we were talking about LinkedIn. I mentioned you were coming on the podcast. They shared with me that they've got a concern about looking too small online, if that
Mm,
makes sense. You know, they
yeah.
they wanted some feedback on or some advice on ways they could punch above their weight on LinkedIn. So does that
Yeah.
make sense to you? And what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think we've probably touched on one of those things already, which is to nominate the champions of the business and make sure that they are building a personal brand so that that
Yeah,
represents the whole. To look for more opportunities to comment in other spaces, particularly on posts where there are respected leaders of the industry, and you're kind of you're gaining authority by some association with. Oh well, Rick is commenting on this person's stuff, probably he knows them, and therefore that confers some status on you. So look for those opportunities as well. And if you can do any kind of partnership collaboration stuff or investment in new research, those things, if you become, again, like you said, a media company, the thing
yeah.
that the institute that publishes new research because you found some new legislation or some changes to the way that business should run or the way that people think about business. If you can publish those things, again, that confers a lot of status on you as well. So it's all about positioning. And there are large businesses with lots of reputation that actually aren't run by that many individuals.
Yeah.
It definitely can be done. It will require a bit of time and energy, and you probably want to, for example, standardize your media kit so that all of your images are on brand. Your videos are nicely shot and things like that. But yes, personal brand, lots of commenting, new research. If you can do those things, that'll make you feel like a bigger player than you probably are.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And on the subject of personal brand, let's talk about personal profiles a moment.
Hmm.
Easy wins. Let's talk about those. Again, I was speaking to an MSP. We were talking about LinkedIn. This is going
Yeah.
back a couple of weeks now. And I said I would bring this up with you, John, to get the cutting edge advice on this.
Mm.
What are, let's just say, three easy wins an MSP owner can implement today to improve their personal LinkedIn profile?
Yeah. This advice hasn't really changed a lot over the years
Mm,
because you've got to think about what is the most visible part of your profile. Well, readers are lazy, and therefore it's the stuff that's in the top card, the stuff that's at the very top. So, having a really clear photo where your face is taking up 40 or 50% of the screen at least, having a really compelling headline, especially the opening 40 or 50 characters, because that's the piece of text that's going to follow you on every surface of LinkedIn, especially when you start leaving comments. You want that headline to really
yeah.
catch the attention and people go, wow, who's that? And then filling as much of the 2,600 characters that you now have for your about statement, because that is effectively like the longer version of your headline. It's the place where you can go into more detail. Now, last time we talked, you had a 3-line preview for your about statement. It's now a 4-line preview. So what you need to do is make sure that the first 4 lines say exactly what you do and for whom. So if you're one of those geographically based businesses, it's essential that you get that across in the first 4 lines of your about statement, and use the rest of the space to document what your actual process works like. Do you ever do stuff on site? Is it all done remotely? Do you need to set up Zoom calls or team calls with people? What other services do you offer? Is there kind of a ladder of services that you offer, from, we'll just send you an ebook, to all the way through to, we'll manage each person's account individually, or something like that. Make that explicit so that people know what they're getting before they contact you, and then
Yeah.
show as many examples in that about statement of relevant businesses you've worked with, or maybe a killer quote from someone as well. And if you've got any space left after you've done all of those things, try and convey some of that personality towards the end of the about statement, so that you stand out from all the other MSPs that are in the market, because there are loads of them. You need
Yeah.
something that will be memorable, and you don't want to be competing on price. So you've got to compete on something else. So if you've got a trademark technology, then that's great. You can talk about that, but chances are it might be something to do with your approach, or something to do with your values that come out, so that you become the person who gets remembered, and you become, talk worthy.
Yeah, in my profile, I've got about my love of a cheeky Nando's in there, John. So, what
There
are
we
your
go.
thoughts on
Yeah.
that sort of unique stuff
Yeah.
that sort of makes
I
you stand out?
I say this to everyone. Every client I say, have a section that's called icebreakers you can talk to me about.
Yeah,
And every so often I just cycle it with whatever's hot for me right now. So, it's just something that is, you might just look at that and think, well, that's a bit, does anyone really care? Well, you don't want to start every conversation with a possible sales deal, because that turns people off.
yeah,
So you need another way to start a conversation. This is the evolution of going for a round of golf with someone, which is the way back in the day. That's how business deals used to get made, right? You have some kind of friendly exchange first, and then by the time you're finishing up, you might be ready to do a deal. The digital equivalent of that is finding the way to open a door to conversation. So having those icebreakers is really, really valuable. And, people, I had just the other day, someone messaging me and using my secret word, which I put on my profile as a it's just a sign. It's an anti-AI sign, actually, to say,
yeah,
look, if you see this, mention it in your invitation to me, because I'll know you're human, and I know that we can talk about this thing. So if anyone doesn't know what that means, go and have a look at my profile, at my about statement. You'll understand what it means. Use that approach, because again, it's just something a bit different and a bit memorable. And if you end up being the person that people remember, that's worth, financially, it's worth a massive amount, because you're more likely to get the gig or the referral or whatever.
yeah. I love that approach, and I wouldn't say this is more cynical, but I use those sort of things as almost tripwires. So you can imagine get loads and loads of people,
Mm,
getting in touch one and slice them a time, and yet it patently shows that some people get in touch and haven't looked at your profile one bit. So when I include
yes.
things about, I love a cheeky Nando's, and
Yeah.
love the peri peri and things like that, those people who mention it, just shows it's a little tripwire
Yeah.
to show, oh, you've been paying attention here.
Yes.
You're not just going through the motions.
Yes, it's one of the reasons why some people change their first name field, so that they include a special character or something in there,
Right.
or some unusual capitalization, because they know that the bots are probably just going to put it verbatim, and that's the surefire giveaway that it was a form
Ah,
message. You do need to be careful, because apparently LinkedIn don't like special characters in the name field, so
yeah.
I would avoid that. And also, a very frequent topic that comes up is whether you should put your accreditations in your name field. Personally,
Mm,
I'm not really a fan of that,
not
because
me. Not me.
I find that when I tag people, so you put the at symbol and then someone's name, if it comes up with a long stream of gobbledygook
Yeah.
at the end, and I don't know what all MSP qualifications mean, I'm just less likely to tag that person, because it just looks like a real mouthful.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was just Richard Tubb, that's fine. But all the post nominals, not a great idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, just keep that in mind. And actually, that reminds me of another tip I'm going to give you, because a lot of people
Okay.
have asked me about this recently. It's kind of a bit of a hot topic about data security. Is, should you get verified on LinkedIn?
Mhm.
And LinkedIn themselves have said that their stated aim is to have 100 million accounts verified by the end of this year. I don't think they're anywhere close to that. And at the
Mm,
moment, there's no actual obvious advantage to being verified. But
mm.
I do think there's an analog in the future with secure websites. When they came around, no one had HTTPS, and it was a bit of a fancy, like, oh, this is just for e-commerce, and the average mortals don't need to bother with this. In 2025, you go to a website that isn't HTTPS, Chrome,
Yeah.
or whatever, it's going to go, are you sure you want to go here? So that might be the future for LinkedIn. It's like, if you're not verified, you might not have access to all of the services, and you might not even have your profile visible to people because they can't verify it's a real thing. We're nowhere close to that now. But basically, if you're uh, if you've got an active passport and you haven't got, you've got a name that matches what your LinkedIn profile is, the process of verification is very quick. I did mine in 3 minutes. I timed
Yeah.
it, and you're passing your passport details to, in the UK it's persona. So LinkedIn aren't getting your details direct. So it's probably not quite the security concern that a lot of people think it is. I
Mm,
understand why some people would be hesitant, but at the moment, I've got to say, it doesn't confer any real benefit on you. I can't say if you verify, you're suddenly going to get 20% more views of your content. It doesn't really work like that. But
yeah.
it is nice to have a little shield on your profile which says that you're verified. If you want to do the workaround, there is a workaround, which means that you don't need to give over your passport details, and that is to get your company page verified, which is currently free and requires no real credentials. The only thing is there's a waiting list. So if you go on your company page as an admin and you go into your settings, there's something in there called verification controls, and you could say, please verify this company page. And once you've done that, might take a few months. Once you've done it, any employee that has a verified email domain for that company, so in my case, it would be espirian.co.uk,
Yeah.
they then can have the right to have a shield on their personal profile, and they've not needed to show their passport in doing that at all. So it's a completely secure way of getting a badge without giving over any real personal details.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that process, but I know I've gone through the personal verification process, and as you say, it was absolutely painless. I got no concerns about persona and that. It was fine. I want to change tact just for a moment. I want to talk about the almost the psychology or the motivation of using LinkedIn. So when I started, writing what was then Richard Tubbs' blog, which is now
Mm-hmm.
Tublog, the hub for MSPs, 20 years ago, there was certainly I look back and after, a year or whatever of doing this, 18 months, you don't see any comments. You don't see, well, there weren't likes at that time, which shows how old I was, but you don't see that engagement. And you feel sometimes as though, am I just shouting into the void here? And to find the motivation to continue with that. And I think there's a lot of analogies with today's social media. People have got shorter attention spans. They expect or they want to put the work into something, a platform like LinkedIn, and see instant results. But we know that's not the case. So, what
Yeah.
advice could you give to people about timescales, about keeping motivated, perhaps even when they're not seeing the likes, when they're not seeing the reactions, when they're not seeing the comments, if that makes
Yeah.
sense?
I think it's probably worth keeping in mind that every successful content creator on, let's say, YouTube, probably did 100 videos
Yeah.
that got one like, right, before anything happened. So everyone starts off like that. So that's a common thing. And all of the people who end up being winners in this business are the ones who just didn't quit. And they kept going, right? So you're a case in point. This podcast is just going and going and going. But I bet it wasn't a massive success in episode one,
Oh, goodness,
right?
no.
So just keep that in mind. Also, I would say make sure that you're creating content that you yourself can use in your future sales conversations. So,
Mm,
by which I mean, for example, if someone asks you a question about how your MSP service is delivered and it's really specific and you've answered that publicly, even if that thing didn't actually get any comments, you can bring that piece of content that you created into the conversation and say, oh, well, I wrote that about that 6 months ago. Here's the specific answer to this thing. And that gets that customer closer to being over the line because, again, they'll think, oh, this person's done it all before. They've got every answer to every question I've ever asked, and it won't matter to them that this thing didn't get a million comments because you're answering a specific question through a public piece of content. So make content that is useful to your customers but also useful to you as part of your sales conversation, and do please stick at it because there's countless examples of people who didn't blow up overnight. They just kept creating content for actually years, and building that content estate eventually will turn into something valuable for you. Just the Google juice that you get from having all that stuff out there in the world, whereas your competitor has not put in that effort. They're just not going to get the same level of trust when people are
yeah.
making a buying decision.
Love that. And you've got very strong views on LinkedIn direct messages, on DMs.
Yeah.
So, for the again, for the benefit of listeners, what would a great cold outreach message look like for an MSP speaking to a small business in their area? And John, what are the prime examples you see of like, oh goodness, no, please don't do that?
Yeah, I think a great example is something that demonstrates that you are sending a personal message to a named individual, and
Mm,
that message would not make any sense if it went to someone else. So it can't just be a form message that you send out to 100 people. It's got to be something where, you've looked at their profile, you've looked at their comments, you get an idea of what the person is like, and you've made an approach that isn't salesy, but that it speaks their language. So, for example, if that person has left recommendations on someone else's profile, you can see them writing about someone else. You can see the turns of phrase they use. You can see, maybe what their motivations are, and you can use some of that in your outreach to that person. So something that is not salesy that shows that you have done your due diligence is great. So, for example, when someone has read my icebreakers and they mention it in the message to me, I know that that's not a robot and that person has taken some time to do some research about me, and I'm much more likely to give them my attention versus, someone just saying, I'm building my network and I'd love to connect. That doesn't really tell me anything. And you could have sent it to 1,000 people, in which case I'm probably going to say no, because realistically, we're going to have very little interaction after the fact. One of the perils here is that free LinkedIn accounts have been restricted relatively recently to only 5 personalized invitations per
Yeah,
month.
this drives me bananas, I've got to say, John,
It's
because for
it's
years I've been on the soapbox about saying, don't
yeah.
use the boilerplate, but now sometimes you're forced to.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a terrible move from LinkedIn, but
Agreed.
although I kind of economically I can kind of understand why they're doing it. It's because they don't want people to build too much of a first level network, because that means that you can see deeper into LinkedIn's search database, and that's the thing that they're actually monetizing with things like Premium and Sales Navigator. So they
Okay.
want you to follow people rather than connect with them, and one of the ways of putting you off with connecting is to remove the personalized note. Where you can, I would use it. So certainly use those 5 per month, but also look for other opportunities to interact with people. So you can interact with people in groups, in comments. You can ask for personalized introductions from mutual connections. So I could say, well, look, Bob, I'd really love to connect with Rick. I don't have any personalized invitations left. Could you introduce us? And that way you get into a DM, and they're much more likely to accept an invitation off the back of those things. So
Yeah.
there are ways and means around those things, but just don't do the things that look generic, because like people like me, I've got dozens. I tend to have dozens of outstanding invitations in my network tab, and the ones that haven't made any effort, I'm just going to not remember them, and probably if I'm really busy, I'll just go and ignore a load of them because I'm busy on other projects. So
Yeah.
don't be ignored, because if you are, then that's probably a 3 week timer on when you can go and try and invite them again. You've got to try and, I would say, try and invite fewer people, but just invest more time in each invitation so that your hit rate goes up. Because LinkedIn will take note of that as well. If you've got a very high proportion of acceptance, if I invite 10 people and 9 of them say yes, well, LinkedIn will likely look more favorably on my future attempts to push the limits of who I want to try and connect with, rather than if I've got a very low acceptance score, I might be seen
Yeah.
as some kind of spammer, and that could be bad for my just LinkedIn visibility in general.
Yeah. And I have gone a step further with mine many, many years ago now because I was getting literally hundreds of invites from
Mhm.
people. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Why? What's in it for me? What is the point in that? So I turned it to the point where you have to have my email address to
Yeah.
connect with me. But my email address is a matter of public record. Richard at
Yeah.
tublog.co.uk. It's the same email address that's been there 15, 20 years. It's not difficult. And yet it's one of those little tripwires that I talked about, John, where
Yeah.
people say, well, I couldn't connect with you. I don't know your email address. And I'm like, well, it's in my profile. It's on my website. You could have just
Mm.
Googled it or asked about it easy. But that way of almost stopping people from just doing the bare minimum to connect. And so I've reached that stage. What are your views on that? Those, more of those sort of tripwires and sort of saying to people, why should we connect? Not just connecting for the sake of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good idea. You want to build a quality network. And it just demonstrates how lazy people are, isn't it? When you
Yeah.
do stuff like that and they still fail. But yes, I'd rather grow slowly but more intentionally with people I'm actually going to have a
Yeah.
conversation with. And just to come back to the DM thing, I think it is a lot of effort to do DMs right, and it's one of my frustrations is that I can't really show often in training sessions how it works in practice because
Mm.
you'd be breaking all sorts of kind of
Yeah.
unwritten privacy rules if I go, well, look at this conversation I had and look at this one. But I try and use all of the tools at my disposal. So, DMs allow you to have group chats, they allow you to have voice notes, they allow you to do video notes, they allow you to do uploads. And a recent thing, which no one is talking about, we have talked about in Espresso Plus, but no one is talking about publicly. And here's the strategy I'm going to give you, which is probably an advanced one that I think will work brilliantly if you actually commit to this, is you can now send videos from desktop as uploads, right? So you're not
Mm.
recording live inside LinkedIn on desktop, but you can basically drag an MP4 file into into DMs. So here's what I would do. I would create a set of videos that answer some of the most common questions that you get and do them in portrait mode so they're going to be consumed on mobile in most cases. And I would start the video with something like, that's a great question. Here's what I would do, or here's what we did last month. And then you answer that very, very common question. And then when someone asks you something, you can just drag and drop that pre prepared MP4 into a DM. It'll feel like it's a totally personalized thing.
Yeah.
You're giving someone really, really useful feedback. You can, of course, record these things on the fly as you go. That's arguably much more authentic if you do that. But having that kind of system in place, imagine the 10 most commonly asked questions in videos ready in a folder on your desktop. And it's just a drag and drop from desktop, straight upload, job done. And no one else is doing that at the moment that I've seen. It's a great way of standing out and makes you feel much more memorable in the DMs.
I absolutely love it. And I say this quite a lot, but the bar is actually really quite low to be remarkable. It's remarkably easy to be remarkable using some
It
of
is.
those tips that you just said, because the vast, 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 vast majority of people just don't make any effort, and that's
Yeah.
no knock on anybody. But as you say, people can be lazy. So if you make any type of effort, my goodness, it can stand out by a mile, can't it?
It really can. Yeah. I think DMs are that's where I actually transact all of my business. Like all the stuff I do publicly is setting up conversations that I have behind the scenes. And,
Yeah.
and a small proportion of those conversations behind the scenes lead to someone recommending me for work or actually hiring me directly. So think about, I don't really like talking about funnels, but if you think about your profile being optimized for discoverability with keywords, and then your posts being optimized to help people, all of that is aimed at trying to start more conversations. And it's that small proportion of conversations that turn into business that are the things that keep your business going. And if you're not exploiting that route of bringing new business in through LinkedIn, and you're just relying purely on word of mouth or purely on your email list or purely on your website, you're probably leaving money on the table. LinkedIn is where the world comes to do business. People are apt to pay more money, and so many people are not using the platform well or outsourcing it to AI. If you're the human person who answers people's questions,
Yeah.
you're just much more likely to get picked.
Yeah. Here's something I've been doing. And again, we mentioned earlier the Go Giver philosophy, Bob Berg, that type of thing. I'm a big fan of. And I do it mostly because it's really fun as well.
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn testimonials. So I make a point. I've left a great testimonial for you, John, and other people that I really rate, and I think I love it because everybody loves getting some lovely words that somebody's written about you, displaying it on your profile. I've given probably about 300 odd LinkedIn testimonials over the past few
Mm-hmm.
years, and I don't do it for this reason. But if you look at my profile, I think there's 150 odd. LinkedIn testimonials that people have left for me saying really nice things, which is great. So let's put the human element to one side. It's lovely giving and receiving testimonials. Does it have any benefit at all for the benefit for your LinkedIn profile outside of the social proof that people are going to see looking at your profile? What are your thoughts on LinkedIn testimonials in
Yeah, yeah,
2025?
yeah. LinkedIn calls them recommendations. They're very, very important.
Recommendations, my
So
mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, all other things being equal, someone with 100 recommendations is always going to outrank in the search someone who's only got 10 or none
Really?
at all,
Yeah.
right? So it's definitely worth doing. There is a tip for getting your own recommendation URL. Now, if anyone is listening to this and you would like to find out your own, please message me and I will show you how to find it.
Yeah.
And the reason why that's useful is because, kind of going back to your tripwires analogy, people are lazy. And if you give them a very easy way to get exactly to the screen that will let them recommend you, that's much better than just saying, "Can I have a recommendation, please?"
Yeah. Because they'll
So,
say, how
so
do you do that? And yeah, yeah,
exactly. And what I've done is just to extend that to make it even easier for people. I've created my own short custom URL that points to my specific recommendation page.
brilliant.
And I've put that in my email signature and I've put that in my invoices. So if I've got someone I'm connected with on LinkedIn and that line says, if you like my work, please recommend me on LinkedIn, it gives them a one-click way of getting to the screen in question that will let them leave me a recommendation. That far increases my chances of getting those numbers up, and that increases my search capability on the platform. So you've got to think of it just making it easier for the user. So if you don't know how to do that, and most people don't, please drop me a line. I'll show you how to do it, and then you can get your own for your own purposes.
And you should definitely drop John a DM and ask him about that because it is absolutely gold. I've used that technique after using it from you. And when you get in touch with people now, after I've done maybe a speaking gig or a piece of work for a client or whatever, if you just say to them, "Hey, can you leave me a testimonial?" It sort of goes away. It sort of floats away because people are nice, of course they are, but if there's any sort of friction, they won't do it. Yet if you drop them a line and say, "Could you leave me a LinkedIn testimonial by clicking on this short link?" Bosh,
Mm.
people just go and do it there and then. So I'd highly encourage you to follow up with John, and we'll include everything that me and John have talked about in the show notes for this show at tublog.co.uk. So please don't worry about that. Here's a question for you, John, and I hope this question makes sense to you. But in your opinion, what's one thing that MSPs think that they should do on LinkedIn, but you're like, no, you really shouldn't do that?
I think people who just posting the kind of archetypal old school LinkedIn thing, delighted to be introducing this new HR person, or picked up some award that no one's ever heard of and it's a really boring image. That kind of stuff, like, no one really cares. You've got to think about what's in it for the reader. The reader
Yeah,
doesn't really care if you've got someone new in the HR department. What does that matter, right? It's much more important to think about what is it going to move the needle for that person. So, for example, if I'm posting about stuff that's coming down the pipe or legislation changes they need to know about, or the biggest issue that's causing people to lose money with their IT setup, that people care about those basic things, like what's going to keep me in a job, how am I going to save money, what are the things that are going to make me look good, or get a promotion somehow, or whatever, or look good in front of my boss. Those are the things. People are greedy and selfish. So kind of you've got to play into that. Doing things that is making it all about you.
yeah,
It might kind of make you feel good, but actually doesn't serve anyone. That is not helpful at all.
yeah.
It's just it's instantly forgettable. So just avoid those posts. It's actually better not to post at all than to post stuff like that, because that kind of visibility is not really helping you build a trust with people. So think again before you post. Think again about what is it that you're trying to do on the LinkedIn world, and make sure that everything is in service of that. So this comes back to having a brand identity, and most businesses don't really think in those terms. They'll just think about what service they're providing, and they just want to focus on the minutiae of that, but
Yeah.
they're not thinking about what is the feeling that you want to give people. If you want to be the most helpful IT company in Coventry, or for example, you better think about everything that you post before you hit the button, because if it's not in service of that, it's better off not being on the page.
Yeah, I love it. I've got to say, John, every time I speak to you, I come away inspired. I come away motivated. And when I attend Uplift Live, quite often I've got to, and I'll be fully transparent here. I've come into that event, and sometimes we bumped into each other as friends just as you're about to, and you're very busy on the day. And I say, I've got a real love-hate relationship with LinkedIn because I
Mhm.
reach a point with LinkedIn where I'm like, oh, everybody's just spamming, everybody's using AI, everybody's not being human on it. And then I have
Mhm.
a conversation with you, or I attend Uplift Live, and I come away re-energized because the real go-giver philosophy that you exemplify out there about essentially just being a good human on LinkedIn, and people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So, what would let's tie up the conversation here, and you've given freely of your advice as always. So, thank you for doing that. We started off this conversation talking a bit about AI. Let's end the
Mhm.
conversation talking about the worst of AI, how people can use it for comments, for posts, and things like that. But what I'm hearing from you is the human still shines through. What are your overall thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you can see that LinkedIn is very committed to building AI onto the platform, but it's also very clear that people are railing against it.
Yeah.
And so the way to stand out is to show that humanity, and the robots can't quite match that for now, right? So do the things, do more of the things that show that you're a real human being. So whether that's sharing stories in comments that show that you've got real world experience, showing evidence that you are in the real world in your locality. For example, if you're applying to geographic businesses, that you're out and about on the ground, go to real world events. Actually meet people in person. There's still a lot to be said for that, because that's
Oh
how
my
you
goodness, yeah.
also become memorable as well. And just do the things that the robots can't do. I think that's the way of standing out for now. In the future, it might be possible to automate away all of that, but I think we'll probably have bigger societal issues to contend with if we ever get to that point where, deep fakes and whatever else have you can't actually tell the difference. But we're not quite there yet, and there is still time. And also remember that not everyone is going to become a customer. Okay, if I say to my clients, if we do everything right with your profile, we optimize everything right, maybe 1% or 2% of the people who stop by your profile will end up being a customer. That means that there's going to be arguably 98% noise, the people who are just there, take a look, they don't remember you, they don't, or they might copy your ideas. Doesn't matter, because if you've got that pipeline of 1 or 2%, that's more than you had before. And you probably don't need millions of customers to run a business,
Yeah.
right? So focus on those 1 or 2%. There are good people on LinkedIn. There are a lot of time wasters as well. But if the 1 or 2% are the good people that you want to attract, that'll be enough.
Yeah. John, this has been incredible. Now, if you're listening to this and you've not come across John's work before, welcome to the club. You're going to have built some incredible raving fans today. So let's leave people with ways to follow up with you. So I hope it's not as long before we have you back on the podcast, I should say, John, but this has been absolutely incredible. You've just delivered value across the board. So we mentioned the Espresso Plus community. So where can people go and find out more about Espresso Plus, and remind us what exactly is it?
Yeah, well, the community, if you go to my profile, so if you search for my name, John Espirian, one of my featured links at the very top of my profile will link you to the Espresso Plus community. So that is a community of people, mostly small business owners, who want to get better online visibility, help with content, personal branding, and LinkedIn best practice. And as you said earlier, LinkedIn changes so much
Yeah.
that what I do is once a month, I do a roundup of all the new things that you need to know about. And that's my way of keeping my members abreast of everything, so they don't need to do their own research, which takes hours and hours and hours. I do that for them instead. So that's Espresso Plus. That's the community that I run. That's my main way of making money through my presence on LinkedIn. Yeah, and the other thing that I do is now run a LinkedIn focused conference, and that's what Uplift Live is. So if
Yeah.
you don't necessarily feel you want the ongoing help, but you just want to invest in a day of learning from the world's best speakers on LinkedIn best practice, that's really the conference to come to. And just as an experiment, I'm trying a small version of that event that's
Yeah.
coming up in Cardiff in September, which I'm calling Uplift Live Nano. So a small version. And that's just going to be a lunchtime event with a bit of learning and a kind of buffet lunch. So we'll see if people want to come across to Cardiff to learn a bit about LinkedIn best practice. But all of those are available through my profile. So come and check me out. Let's have a chat. I'm always open to DMs. And I have, because I do pay for LinkedIn Premium, I have what's known as open profile turned on, which means that anyone on LinkedIn, whether or not we're connected, can message me completely for free. So drop me a line, read my icebreakers. Let's have a chat. Say that you heard me on the Richard Tubb podcast, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. John, and again, I would give my 100% endorsement. Espresso Plus, no brainer for me. Just having access to you, John, makes it, a no brainer in terms of that membership free. Uptime Live, I beg your pardon, Uplift Live. There we go. I got through the entire podcast without making that mistake. I said to you just before we came on air, uh, my good friends Bradley and Jason at Uptime have started their own event called Uptime Live. And I said, forgive me if I make the mistake and mention it, Uplift Live. Both brilliant events, I should say. But Uplift Live, absolute no brainer. If you're into LinkedIn, go along, spend time with John, spend time with the experts who are on stage, and you'll either see it as a bonus or a detriment. But I'm at that event every year as well, so take that for what you find it. But absolute no brainer, John. This has been incredible. You deliver so much value as you go through. Thank you so much for being awesome. And on a personal level, as a friend, thank you for being my go-to expert for LinkedIn for many, many years now. You are an amazing person, my friend. I appreciate you.